Hi everybody, Kevin Lane here. It's time for another Uncle Jonesy's Camera of the Week, and today we're looking at the Minolta Hi-Matic 7S. The Hi-Matic 7S comes from the Minolta Camera Company in Japan. It's a 35mm rangefinder camera. The Hi-Matic series of rangefinder cameras from Minolta began in 1962 with the Minolta Hi-Matic. And 1 year later, they updated that camera and called it the Minolta Hi-Matic 7. And then just a few years later, in 1976, they added a few features to that camera and it became the Hi-Matic 7S. The features they added were a safe load indicator on the back and a hot shoe on the top for flash. Otherwise, the Minolta 7 and the 7S are the same cameras. Now, as I said, a 35mm rangefinder camera, so when you focus, you're bringing a split image together in the viewfinder. Now, the lens on this camera is a Minolta Rocar 45mm f1.8, and it has 6 elements in 5 groups. It's a very high quality lens. I have found it to be very sharp and renders color and definition really well, and I don't have a lot of problems with flare on this camera, so I recommend this lens on this camera. Now let's talk about the exposure system. The exposure system, there are 2 modes on the exposure system. One is automatic and the other is metered manual. And when I say automatic, it controls both the aperture and the shutter like a program system. Now, both of those modes are powered by a CDS light meter cell inside. And Minolta calls their light meter system the CLC, or Contrast Light Compensator. Now, this same CLC system was used on their SRT cameras, of single lens reflex cameras. And how does it work? Well, on those cameras, it actually has 2 cells inside, and they read different areas of the frame, so that if you have in a frame that you're shooting, you have a large amount of contrast between one part of the frame and the other. The 2 cells average it out to try to give you a good exposure. Now, there seems to be some debate as to whether this camera actually has 2 cells or not, but it still calls it the CLC. I don't know how that works. I can tell you that the meter on this camera is very accurate. I found it to, if you have a working one, I found it to be a reliable meter system. Now, using the camera, I have found that I like this camera. When I went back and looked at, I did an inventory of the rolls of film that I've shot over the past 2-3 years. I think this camera could come in first as far as the number of rolls of film I shot in any single camera, at least in black and white. I think I've used it more than any other camera that I have. So I must like something about it. And the thing I like about it is that it is a very solid, sharp looking camera that functions very well. Like I said, that quality of that lens. It's also quiet. It has a leaf shutter inside the lens. There's the sound. And it is fairly simple to operate. And I've never used it in the automatic mode. I've only used it in the metered manual. So when you do use it, if you're using it in metered manual, the first thing you do is you look through the viewfinder, and there's a needle in there, and there are numbers on the side of the viewfinder. Not shutter speeds or aperture settings, but just numbers. And those are EI or EV, or exposure value numbers. So you look through, and let's say it gives you a 13. Then you look on the lens barrel, and you have your shutter speed and your aperture rings all there. And you turn those until you see a 13 in that window. Let's see now. Let's make a 13. Yeah, I have a 13 in there. All right, can you see that? All right, so now that you have 13 selected, you can then put your finger on the ring like this, and you can control both rings at the same time. So you can change the shutter speed, but it compensates, and changes the aperture the same way as long as you stay on that number 13 until the light changes, of course, and then you've got to meter again. Now, if you want to try it in automatic, then you put both rings at the A, right at the top where that little arrow is. See that? Now that you're in automatic mode, you simply focus the camera, which is done by this focus area, this focus control here, and look through, get your little split images lined up. That's how rangefinder works. And then snap the shutter and just move on. So once you learn that workflow, it becomes a very easy camera. I think it becomes intuitive. I think it's one of those cameras where if you use it enough, you just become at one with it. Now, a couple of things about it that are maybe not my favorite. Number one is that you cannot use this camera with gloves or heavy gloves because you simply can't get your finger on just one of the rings that easily to change. All right? Can't do that. Another thing is because of that EV system, you don't really know what your shutter speed is until you look at the top of the lens barrel. It doesn't tell you anything like that. It just gives you that exposure value number, and you line up your exposure on the lens like that. Now, another thing that people talk about with this camera is the shutter advance lever. I want you to see if you can watch my thumb here. When I fire that shutter, you see how far that goes? That is the longest shutter advance throw of any camera I've ever seen. Now you can do it in little bits like that. You don't have to do it all in one. You can do it. But you can also see that it is not the quietest camera in the world because every time that shutter level, advanced level comes back, it makes that sound. But you know what? I kind of like the sound of cameras working like that. Now, because this is a hot shoe, you can put a flash on there. I have a Vivitar 252. That's my go-to flash. And I use it so that I can have it in a long or short setting. And I just set the aperture and the shutter speed to about 60, is fine. And then set the aperture to one of the two settings, either long or short flash, and shoot away, and you're going to get a pretty good flash picture. All right, so the build quality is excellent. The lens is excellent. I should say one more thing about this camera. As you could probably see, it's not a small camera at all. It's not hardly a compact camera. It's a pretty good sized camera, which I kind of like. I mean, it looks like you have a fancy camera when you're wearing this, for whatever that's worth. I know. I don't really care what a camera looks like, although I am attracted to good quality machinery and craftsmanship. But it is a big camera. That means it doesn't get lost in your hands, but you are not going to slip it into your pocket. In fact, I have Uncle Jonesy's SRT 202 here, and if you put them together, you see that it is not a whole lot smaller than the SRT 202. All right. Okay, so you've been seeing some sample images on this video, and I hope that gives you an idea of what it does. By the way, the lens is not interchangeable. That's the lens you get with it. Has a self-timer as well. So, the Minolta Hi-Matic 7S. There are lots of them out there. If you are interested in one of these cameras, try to get one with a meter works. Otherwise, you're just going to be working with the meter that's in your head or in your eyes or an external meter. And I like this camera, and I'm going to continue to use it. It's going to be one of my, perhaps my go-to Japanese rangefinder. All right, well, that's our look at our camera of the week. If you enjoy these videos, then please check out our podcast. It's Uncle Jonesy's Cameras podcast. You can find it on any of your favorite podcast services like iTunes, Spotify, Google Play. And we're out there. We've got 24 episodes, and we'll make some more when we get a chance. If you enjoy reading, might check out our blog It's unclejonesiescameras.blog, or let me do that again, unclejonesiescameras.blogspot.com. And Jonesy's is spelled Jonesys. We take out the apostrophe. We have a Facebook and Instagram page, UJC Podcast, at UJC Podcast, of course. And we'd love to hear from you. If you'd like to write us, you can at unclejonesiescameras@gmail.com. Or you can just leave comments on this on the comments part of the video, or go visit our Instagram or Facebook page to do the same. But we'd love to know your thoughts about this camera or any camera that you have. We're just one big camera club out there. All right. Well, we'll have another video for you next week. In the meantime, whatever camera you have, put some film in it, or if it's a digital camera, stick in that memory card and go out there and capture some memories. And we'll see you next time. Happy shooting, everybody.